Okay, let me start. Welcome to IIA members and others who have joined the webinar. This is organized by Institute of Internal Auditors, India, and initiated by Madras chapter of IIA. I am the Programs Committee Chairman, Vidyadharan. The topic for today's webinar is Redefining the Role of Internal Audit in Cybersecurity. We have an eminent speaker with us, Mr. Vittal Raj. Vittal is a risk assurance and consulting expert and trainer with over 25 years experience in wide range of industries, verticals on IT governance, cybersecurity, privacy, IT assurance, enterprise risk management, and risk-based internal auditing. By qualification, he is a fellow of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India, CISA, CIA, CISSP, CGEIT, CISM, CERIS, Certified Fraud Examiner, and accredited COVID 5 expert. He is member of so many committees with so many institutions. I will give some of the prominent ones. Member of the Reserve Bank of India Standing Committee for Cybersecurity and IT Examination. Member of REBIT's Cybersecurity Assessment Framework Study Group. Member of the Cybersecurity SME of Institute of Chartered Accountants of India Technical Group. Member of the International Finance Committee of ISACA International. Advisor for ISACA India Growth Initiative. He has earlier served as Vice President of ISACA International USA and also in the International Audit Committee. He is the recipient of President's Award for Outstanding Contribution during his tenure as Director of ISACA International. He has served in the Research Committee of IIA Florida, ICAI, ICWAI, ISACA International, and also Governing Council member of Madras Chamber of Commerce and Industry. He is a founder and senior partner of Kumar and Raj Chartered Accountants, Chennai. He is a director in Pristine Consulting Private Limited. He is a faculty with so many institutions, ICAI India, ICAI Sri Lanka, IIA, Indian Police, and banks, various banks, and ISACA chapters in India and overseas. With this brief introduction, I will be requesting our Vittal Raj to proceed with the lecture presentation. Before that, I would like to say to the audience that in between lectures, Vittal would like to take up questions and he will answer the queries raised by the audience. So whenever Vittal Raj gives a pause, the queries you can go on posting and it will be seen by the organizer, Mr. Chanchal, and he will read out the questions and he may even give opportunity to some of the audience to on a live basis ask the query that will be answered by Vittal. Over to Vittal, please. Thank you.
Good evening to you all. Thank you, Vidya. I really appreciate being given this opportunity by the Institute of Internal Auditors India and the Madras chapter. And it is indeed my pleasure being the past president of the Madras chapter, and it is always an enlightening experience to share thoughts with the group of internal auditors. So I'm just here to share a couple of my thoughts on one of the areas which I think is becoming very important. And incidentally, COVID-19 has been one of those happenings which kind of, even though a catastrophe, is kind of redefining the role of internal audit, especially when it comes to cybersecurity. That's where I thought I had proposed this topic, and Vidya and others, they had been kind enough to accept this, and here I am to share a few thoughts on this. So let me get on to my presentation. So in this coming about 1 hour and 1 hour and 30 minutes approximately, what I intend doing is to discuss on setting the context first to say, what is it that COVID-19 has really done in terms of cyber risks and issues? And in the context of really, was there a role for us as internal auditors? How did we fare? So we'll look at that. But I think more important would be the discussion on, is there going to be a change in the way internal auditors' role is looked at with regard to cybersecurity in what many refer to as the post-COVID era? Because COVID clearly has shaken up the fundamentals of our lives and lifestyles. So the way that business is going to operate in the future is going to be completely different, is what many believe. So we'll certainly look at that, but more so, I think, also look at the context of saying, why is it that internal audit is best suited to really take the front seat when it comes to cyber risk management, and what's happening really on that, and what are the reasons of that, and how do we really get there? So this is what broadly I intend discussing during this session. And as Vidya said, I'll be happy to stop in between. In the meanwhile, you can always post if you have any questions, and subject to time constraints, we'll take up as many of them as we can and move forward with the session. So first of all, I think what COVID-19 has done is it has completely exposed the enterprise resilience. If you see, the capability of resilience to continue with its business is certainly standing exposed. Look at the fallouts. We are looking at fundamentals of the industry being shaken up. Number one, the workforce. I think the workforce has really kind of locked down, and I always said that there used to be a time when all of us used to say, is it even possible to stop this world for even 1 minute? And here is COVID, which has stopped the entire world for God knows how many days and weeks, and we really don't know where we are headed to. Manufacturing has been significantly affected. Obviously, there is nothing that has been happening on the manufacturing front, only that many of the manufacturing enterprises are trying to clear their existing stocks. Services very badly hit, and we have seen across industries there are any number of studies which are telling us how each of these verticals have been hit. But I think that kind of also hits the entire ecosystem as such. Travel and logistics, except for certain very small permitted parts, we clearly see that there is almost no travel, and where business travel used to be part of our life, we are all grounded, halted, and life is completely different the way that we are looking at now, as we didn't even imagine. Credit and payments, we have been always glued to our traditional way of doing things, even though many of them moved forward, but there are still many business enterprises wherein checks are still issued, and you still, if not, you at least do only the RTGS transfers. The other form of payments is not so really popular, but then I think it is raising a completely new kind of paradigm to say, do we really need to look at all that and change our ways of how we work? I think the most important impact has been of IT in this scenario. Just imagine that router which is at your home, the Wi-Fi router, and the entire paraphernalia which provides you this, the data link. If that stops, the life comes to a complete grinding halt. So we must really thank the IT links, who have been certainly doing a great job keeping our links alive, because that's what is the only way we can connect to each of our workplaces, our businesses, or wherever. So work from home, looking at cloud, looking at software as a service, and whole new emerge tech. All this is suddenly kind of changed complexion, because 2 months back, all of us didn't really have time for really looking at all this, and things were just going on as such, and it was very hard to really stop production or make any sudden changes to that. But now I think we are confronted with a situation wherein all this, I think, is making a lot of sense to us, and the way that this is going to go on, we really don't know where we are headed to and how long we are headed to. So clearly, I think IT, or work from home or work from wherever you are, is emerging as a new normal. So work from home, what has been happening, I'm sure that many of us are working from home, maybe partly, maybe over time, many of us. I was just listening to one of my friends who heads the IT for one of the largest tractor manufacturing entities, and she was saying that for the first time, their back office departments, the accounts, the the design guys, the whole lot of guys are actually working from home. And not only that, instead of the usual 8-hour work they'll put in at office physically, they are putting in more than 12 hours, and they actually are not complaining. So work from home is completely changing the way we have looked at several things. But mind you, there have been a lot of issues ranging from the lack of technology being available. I mean, BYOD, bring your own device, itself was looked upon as something which is not so acceptable. And here you are working from your personal devices, sitting at home, because obviously the company cannot provide you with their own equipment even if they wanted to, because there is no logistics that's available now. So these are kind of certainly new normals. Even if they wanted to do that, the enablement is becoming a huge problem, because we are all working from whatever is the paraphernalia that we have at our homes. Most importantly, much of our workforce, especially those who have never been used to working from home on their laptops or whatever, it's a completely new experience for them, and many of them struggled in the initial phases, but slowly everybody is getting adjusted to that. But then I think one of the things which is always lurking is cybersecurity. I'm sure when you look at a couple of these apps that we are using, and a whole lot of connectivity that's happening, always there is at this back of my mind, God knows whether it is safe or not, what could happen, we don't know. But then we just want to kind of not really look at that question seriously, because that will stop work. So a whole lot of banking apps being used from home, customer information traveling over channels, digital channels, sensitive enterprise data, maybe your designs, your very sensitive information, which is all traveling across unprotected or not so protected endpoints, meetings which are, I mean, I have had a friend tell me that almost about 60% of his day is spent on meetings, and all through many of these video conferencing tools. So he hardly gets time to really look at home. So that's a kind of environment we are getting into. So all that kind of changing the way that we looked at. So, but for one thing is for sure, work from home is here to stay. Some of us are in, but believe me, many of us, of our workforce, are still not there, because either many of them, they cannot work from home because that's the nature of their jobs, and many of them are not really prepared, either because they have not been trained or because they don't have the technology. But then what's also been happening is the hackers have been extremely happy community as such, because they see for the first time all that data, and many of it which contained a lot of financial information which was kept securely within organizations, is moving to, as I said, insecure endpoints, and through various channels wherein there is a lot of vulnerabilities, and that's where you see a spate of cyber attacks, a lot of scams and frauds. We will look at a couple of them maybe in the next slide. But yes, they are looking at catching on the gullible victims and trying to see how they can benefit from much of that information. A big question: business continuity planning. Well, I'm sure many of the organizations had a business continuity plan, and they also claim to have tested it, but how many of them worked is a big question mark. Because if you had really looked at a typical organization would test for very common scenarios, and common scenarios typically means, okay, there is a fire, and some of them may have moved to a cyber attack. But then here you're looking at a pandemic and with a lockdown of something which is unprecedented. So most of them have either failed partially or totally in really seeing how to get business back to its heels. A whole lot of opportunities are being lost because if you really see there's lack of agility. I mean, and you are not able to secure online presence. The digital channels are suspect. So those in the management preferably want to avoid any sensitive communication. But then you don't know what to do. How long will you keep on postponing that? These are kind of very difficult questions that are at the face of most of the managements. Audit, technology, IT risk committees. The big question is, did they really see this coming? And if not, why did they not see this coming? Because that's a question that would obviously get asked as this gets elongated. And especially when we see certain other organizations which are able to work from home and run their enterprises, it's now a question of competitiveness. So why is it that we are not able to do that is certainly a big question mark that's coming in. Going back to our work, the risk registers play such an important role, but then it is not very abnormal or uncommon to find that risk registers either don't or very scantily only figure cybersecurity risks of the cyber world as such. And the organization could have an ISO 27001, but it's a good possibility that all that has not really worked when it needed to work. So the certificate really doesn't matter anymore. So is it for the ISO as a standard? No. As you know, it's more of how we handle the implementation. So the big question always now would start is, who is responsible for cybersecurity and the technology risk assessments? Why was this all not seen and predicted, and why couldn't we really prepare for such a kind of disruption is always a question, even though we know that this is something unprecedented. And of course, this question is also going to be, who is going to be responsible for testing the secure work from home capability, security controls and applications, penetration testing, security evaluations? All this kind of is a big question mark because there is no confidence now to really use many of these channels because there is no assurance. So let's now come, I'm going to play the devil's advocate and possibly be prepared with some of the questions that management might ask. Should internal audit take responsibility? So let us look at that question. Is it something that we should have done or we can do in the future? So that is where I think the rest of the conversation is going to go. So just to slightly deviate from that and tell you, how the threats are really increasing, especially on the cyber. There's a whole lot which is happening. I'm just giving you a glimpse of that. In fact, Google has detected over 18 million scam emails which are purely COVID based. So which means that somebody is trying to exploit the way you look at things and saying that, okay, here's a victim. And believe me, there has been almost 700% increase in spear phishing attacks, which means targeted attacks at specific levels of employees or employees who may have sensitive information which they could be handling. A whole lot of fake charity sites are there. In fact, a whole lot of messages I'm sure you yourself could have got. There is a flood of fake COVID-19 analysis websites because it kind of triggers our curiosity to say, where are we? What is going to happen? Because there is this big uncertainty hanging around. There are lots and lots of WhatsApp COVID campaigns, and I'm sure you have read about how many people lost in terms of supply, the fake supply of masks, the protection equipment. There are a lot of frauds on that. There is also prolific attack on endpoints to exploit the work from home victims, because those are kind of excellent backdoors for hackers to enter the enterprise. So wherever you have unprotected systems, they kind of form as the backdoors for pushing in malware, maybe APT, which is advanced persistent threats, which could be simply pushed through such kind of channels. The most important is enterprise systems are getting attacked. I'm sure we have read about many of the enterprises getting attacked. In fact, an IT major, their enterprise email servers suffered a ransomware attack, bringing down the entire email system globally for almost a couple of days. And we also seen attacks on healthcare firms because they want to cash in on either the IP, or they want to cash in on the personal health data, or they typically want, when you are vulnerable, you obviously are a very good target for the hacker because they want to really make use of the situation. And obviously data is getting stolen, payment channels are getting stolen, they are getting misused, whole lot of things really happening. So the long story short, cyber attackers realize that all of us are anxious as to what is going to happen. We are curious, we are under paranoia, and that's exactly what they are trying to exploit through various kind of morphed attacks. I'm sure you would have seen a lot of them, but then, when the PM's the CARE program was announced, the CARE fund was announced, the very next day, we had someone putting up a fake site, a fake UPI ID with just one S removed, so that, and a couple of people did lose money there. And many banks have been warning, like they're saying that you better get tested and you go to the link and register yourself or do whatever. And these are all extremely malicious kind of attacks. And as I had said earlier, there have been many people, in fact even government agencies, who have lost money over advance book payments made for face masks, which obviously never got delivered. So now the big question is, should internal audit own up responsibility for COVID-19 digital disaster? I know it's a very painful question, but then it is important that we start looking at it, because have we missed if we have not already considered? I am aware that there are many internal audit departments who are very much upfront on, with their agility, taking the responsibility of cybersecurity assessments. But then, mind you, that it is yet globally, even nationally, not something that's so popular. And somehow internal audit departments have been steering clear, or have been only looking at employing certain partners to get things done, but without really taking the ownership in the true sense. So let's get back to something that we celebrate so much, with the Institute of Internal Auditors definition of internal auditing. So it says that internal auditing is an independent, objective, consultative activity, and it is targeted at adding value and enhancing the operations of the organization. Now, I'm sure all of us are very, very familiar with this definition, but then let us put it in the context to answer this devil's advocate question, again from the devil's perspective. Number one, internal audit, what has it done with regard to assessing and challenging technology risk assessments? So I think, one, has the internal audit been actively involved in performing technology and cybersecurity risk assessments? Unfortunately, many of them don't come under internal audit in many organizations. They are done by the technology team themselves, which is obviously a basic conflict of interest. The second thing also is, how many of the internal audit teams have a seat at the cyber risk committee? Have we really kind of projected ourselves and demonstrated to the management the importance of internal audit being there? But then many of the internal audit departments have run shy because either they had skill set shortage, or it was not something that they wanted to really take because it was pretty complex. The other big question also is with regard to the question of, was enterprise digital value versus risk considered by IIA? So when it comes to adding value, did we really look at the value versus risk proposition when whole lot of IT is being adopted? Shadow IT, which is individual departments bypassing the central IT department and using or procuring software, buying online services, putting enterprise data there. So these are all very high risks. But then, was internal audit really in the picture to see that they take command over these things? The big question is, did we really contribute to enhancing operations of the organization? Then the big question really comes up is, why is it that in this lockdown situation, we are also digitally locked down? So that is again quite a good question that could get asked. But then somewhere we realize that possibly, even though may not be to the entire extent of what needs to be done, either many of the internal audit heads, departments, chief audit executives have thought about it, they have a plan in place, or they have some enterprise issues where it has not been canned. But there's also a subset wherein they have not really considered this so seriously, either because of the complexity or, as I said, because of the skill set shortage, etc. So let us look at, how we can make use of this COVID as an opportunity for internal audit to really double up and catch up on, whatever we had to do with regard to cybersecurity risks. Let us please understand, it is our job to challenge the enterprise with regard to the efficiency and effectiveness of its controls of risk management. Hence, we certainly have a role when it comes to cyber risk management as well. So also an important thing that this is the best period for learning, because as we have been hearing and seeing, all this is not going to end now. I mean, it is not that the day the lockdown is lifted, everything is going to be hunky-dory. We all know that. And many countries are already predicting that they have told their citizens that you better expect till the mid of 2021 that things will be up and down. And which again is not completely out of the way, because it all depends upon once the lockdown really goes out, what is going to happen? Are these cases going to spike? Could there be more lockdowns? But one thing is very clear, even if there are no more lockdowns, there is only going to be graded lockdown removals, which means that organizations may be permitted to work maybe partly with a small part of the workforce or whatever, depending upon what is the level of infection in the various areas. So that being what it is, I think interstate travel itself, whether it is flights or whatever surface transport, is still a big question mark. It is not going to start immediately, which means that business is going to be affected to that extent. And international travel is certainly still a big question mark, because we don't know where the world is headed to, and would you want to risk that? If not, how much can you do about it? So till a cure is found, I don't think we really have a lot of certainty with this kind of uncertainty. So it's going to be uncertain quite a while. But then, rather than every day thinking, oh my goodness, is it uncertain, it will be good to say, okay, let's prepare for the worst. And that is where, I always love this saying, when the going gets tough, the tough get going. And I'm sure we internal auditors face a lot of tough times in doing our works. So I think we are very used to tough situations, and this is something, if we impose upon ourselves as something we got to do, even though nobody is asking now, I think that will be the best thing to do, because A, the value of internal audit to the enterprise would go up significantly. B, if you don't adopt this, we could see that the entire internal audit department turning into a kind of useless activity, because digital, because of COVID, is kind of getting fast forwarded. Enterprises which are in the traditional kind of realm have been very seriously looking at work from home, found success in that. So I think we are headed for times when digital would certainly be part of this new normal, as they call it. So let us look at a couple of these aspects. I think one, we have to look at what is going to be the internal auditor's role in the digital enterprise, and in that context with regard to cyber risk management. So I think that will require a completely different way of looking at things, because having used to hard copies and maybe even through ERPs to whatever we are looking at, we need to map the entire flow of transactions. So we need to understand how data moves, not only within the enterprise, but across stakeholders, across the ecosystem. And since we are more and more getting into a more interconnected economy, interconnected digital, the global economy, as we say, I think there's going to be a need for internal audit to completely relook at how information flows, how decisions are made, how controls are implemented, how control information is passed on, and how the threats to these need to be evaluated. And that's exactly where I think we need to look at the larger subject of, there's a whole lot of jargon surrounding this subject. Earlier it was called as IT security, then it was called as information security, then you had cyber risk or cyber security, then we have digital security, but all put in a very simple substance. Let us please understand there are two clear parts to it. When I, as a user, and looking at an ERP, I don't care what software is being used. For me, let us say I am a salesperson, a person raising the invoice, or it could be an inventory manager. My job is more to do with the data with regard to the business of inventory. So that's my world. If you see what is called as the business enterprises world, but then the kind of efficiency that the digital really provides, and that is where we call this layer of this, wherein we are looking at the business technology part, is what today is more popularly called as the digital security. And internal audit departments, for in most cases, have been playing a significant role. But then where it now demands is our sinking down into the what we call from a black box approach to the white box approach, to really understand how these interconnections happen more from an information flow perspective, and understand what these technologies do to that. Because we clearly understand that if there is a ransomware attack, which is a technical attack, it can completely shut down your business. And so we clearly understand, even though this ransomware is something which is so technical, but for me as a business person, it means a complete lockdown of my access to the enterprise information, which means I cannot carry on any more business. So if there is very much clear need for us to understand each of these risks more from the business risk perspective rather than from the pure tech perspective. Of course, the tech perspective also needs to be understood from this perspective. So redefining the risk posture for the new normals is going to be one of the key activities as I see it in the days to come. When things like remote access provisioning, I'm sure many of us would have thought when we had been in our earlier pre-COVID times, if I can call it, that if somebody was accessing an ERP over internet link from home, that was considered sacrilege. Somebody was accessing a banking system even outside the department, that could be considered sacrilege. And somebody who is bringing their own device, and there was always a suspect around, should we give him access or not, what kind of security we need to put in. But now COVID has changed it to the right extreme, because we are not only using our own devices in most cases, our own internet connections in many cases which are insecure, except of course many organizations have gone in for VPNs, but working from home in our home environments from personal devices. So this is certainly something which was unprecedented in the pre-COVID times in many industries, even though we know that certain industries like ITs, they had cracked this earlier because that's how they worked. It was a work profile. But for a lot of us in different industries, a completely new normal. And for the first time, we have started looking at cloud seriously. We are using a lot of video conferencing facilities, much of them free. And even though we know that some of them have been talked about with regard to significant amount of risks, payment systems, because payments are getting made to employees for their salaries, for vendors, whatever was the dues are getting paid up. E-commerce is something which is becoming very, very prominent, because suddenly you start realizing, as a manufacturing enterprise or a physical enterprise, you never had an e-commerce presence. That seems to be a very good idea, because earlier we didn't have the time to look at all this. And in fact, there are many manufacturing enterprises, especially the large ones, who are working with startups to bring in IoT ecosystems in place, and all that is going to get accelerated now. So internal audit will have a significant role when it comes to the value versus the risk judgment, to see, is it something that is in the interest of the enterprise or not. So I think there's going to be a tall order wherein we'll have to meet the challenges if you have already not done that in the past. So to ask these questions, how do you assess, monitor, and examine these cybersecurity risks? And I think we are in for making sure that we come up with a risk-based cybersecurity audit framework, because it has been an unfortunate thing earlier that in many of the cases, the cybersecurity audits were either completely not understood what was going on because of the complexity that underlies them, or it was done by external agencies which would give you a certification like ISO 27001 and you satisfy yourself saying, okay, it seems to be done, right? Or it was done by the IT department themselves, wherein they would get this audited. So the IIA really didn't have much of a deeper role except to say, okay, is it getting addressed or not? But nothing was really done to challenge each and every element of what was being done, how it was being done, is independence being assured, is objectivity being assured in this entire exercise. So we are entering now a new world, which if we have to be relevant as internal auditors, we need to come up with a risk-based cybersecurity internal audit framework, which should consider the digital, the cyber, and the phygital. So what is phygital? Phygital is nothing but, as we know, we are in the industry 4.0. And what is this industry 4.0? Nothing but if you're looking at an autonomous car, you have to please understand that the autonomous car, if it has a software error, can kill a couple of persons on the road. The same thing goes with regard to a hacker who can make that car do that. So we are looking at very, very high risks with the kind of technologies that are coming up. But then, mind you, those are very attractive from a business proposition and the customer experience proposition. Cybersecurity is certainly going to be a significant part of internal audit plan. If not, it's going to be a very, very difficult proposition. So that would require acquiring skills, getting the right kind of training. And I think we had also asked this question today: how successful we have been as internal auditors auditing from home since the last about 2 months? And have we been really equipped? Are we ready? Do we have the mindset? Do we have the skill set? Do we have the confidence to really do all that from home? And the biggest challenge for auditors that comes up is that we are the ones who have been advocating that if you share this enterprise data outside, that would be a big audit issue. But then for the first time, we are now demanding, saying that, hey, I need to get auditing done, so you got to share data. So it's kind of completely new paradigms. And as I said, we are certainly going to see wherein the internal audit departments will have to take this opportunity to embrace the emerging technologies like the machine learning, the robotic process automation, the AI, the all kinds of analytics that you have around, including the fraud analytics, the audit analytics, a whole lot of things which are emerging now. Also technologies such as the blockchain, which are emerging now. So there's a lot of interest which is going to surge the moment things return to normal. And we have to understand that things will return to normal. This is not going to be permanent. But then the only thing is this could be a changed world or somewhat changed world that we'll get into, especially with regard to our the way we work. So the next big question is, why is it that internal audit needs to get a front seat when it comes to cyber risk governance? I think that is a big and important question that we need to answer, because the boards and the managements have always treated us as the friend, philosopher, guide, the ears and eyes of the management, and call what not. We have been the kind of close confidants of the top management. So obviously there is a tremendous amount of asks which we are going to get once we get back to work, because for the first time, even in the boardrooms where IT may not have been discussed so seriously, we could see significant amount of questions coming up to internal audit to saying, why is it that we are not able to do this when others can? So I think it will be important for us to get into that leadership position to really see that we have a seat in driving things. So slightly to deviate from here, but before I do that, I'll just stop here for any questions. So Vidya or Chanchal, if you could help me to see if there are any questions, so that I can just stop and take some questions at this point in time.
Yes, sir. I am trying to give mic to the participants. If we able to speak, then otherwise I will read out.
Yeah, yeah, you can
Yeah,
better read
first.
out because it may some may have problems.
Okay, okay, no problem. First question is from Abhishek Gupta. He is
Ji.
asking how to keep computers secure with meeting applications like Zoom. Some of the webinars are only on Zoom. Should I uninstall after every use? Please share some tips.
Okay, I'll first quickly answer this question. See, first of all, yes, there is a lot of security issues that we have been reading about tools like Zoom. But believe me, when it comes to security, uh, everything that is in IT, security is only good at one point in time, because there is continuous improvements which are made to the environment, the changes to the environment, your system configuration could be different, whole lot of things change. For example, you install one software, the system configuration changes when it comes to security profile. So these are questions which would remain with regard to anything that is going to work over the internet, which is a SaaS solution. And uninstalling and reinstalling doesn't really help, because mind you, these are all, the app is only your front end. The data actually goes through their servers. So if the data is anyway compromised, it is compromised. We would rather, I would urge you to look at it differently, to say, what if all that I have shared on this session gets into the hands of someone else? So what is it that we are looking at? We are looking at the content of that session. So if you are looking at a very sensitive content, obviously it is better not to use Zoom. You want to get onto a conference call or whatever with regard to your office, that's fine. But it's a learning session. You really don't have much to offer because it's anyway public. The only important thing would be the contact information of the participants or any information that is shared on this platform. And for that, I think one of the best ways to reduce risk is to configure your platform properly, because please understand that if you are the CEO of Zoom and you know that Zoom is doing very well because it's one of the most intuitive and very easy to use software and is very cheap, so obviously it is going to be used very widely. So if you are the CEO, you'll obviously not want to lose market. So obviously Zoom is also trying to make up for whatever security lapses or the vulnerabilities that are there. But let me tell you, that holds with every other similar competitive tool. There are security issues with every other tool, and every enterprise in its own right tries to plug them as and when they arise. So I think we have to only look at, as a platform, what is the kind of information that we are putting on. Is it something, I mean, you have to always ask this what if question, to say, what if it gets in the hands of my more dreaded competitor or into the hacker's hands? What can he do with this information? And you'll generally find on sessions like these, much of the information is already available in some public forum or the other. So while the content itself is non-specific, it is more of learning content. The only other thing is your private information with regard to your email IDs, etc. So the chances of that getting exposed. So this is how we have to look at it. And if you're not comfortable with sharing that, I think you would not rather use these and rather going for what is at this point in time rated as little more secure. But let me say that the security profiles keep on changing with regard to every product, because the improvements keep on happening. Let us please understand, the phones that we use are running one of the most insecure operating systems, except for those who are using iPhones or whatever. So we are subject to fundamental platform risks, which are much greater than the app risks. So I think this is where we have to understand. We have to always ask this question of, is it something that is being shared is so sensitive? Then obviously we'll not use any of these channels. I hope that answers your question.
Sir, next question is from Mahesh. Due to COVID-19, few organizations have moved company desktop to employee house. Can an asset from Sage location be moved out? Does it not require STPI approval? What are the implications?
I'm not an expert on the laws other than cybersecurity, but this would be an STPI related rule. Obviously, if there is an enterprise which has restrictions with regard to that, they would do well to follow the compliance requirements. And of course, some government agencies have given certain relaxations. I am not an expert, as I said, on that, so you would possibly need to contact the right kind of expert to say whether it is fine with doing this or not.
Thanks, sir. Next question is from Parthiv. Do you see reduction in staff cost of internal audit department in coming month?
If you ask me honestly, I would think the other way around. Because honestly, there is going to be so much of work that is going to come to us. The only thing is the complexion of work will change. We are going to see lot of design-based work which is going to come to the internal audit department. Lot of advisories which the department would be required to do. So which means that your traditional skills of doing maybe a basic analysis or just doing some very simple comparisons, all that will go away. So that may not happen immediately, but it is in the coming years. We certainly see significant amount of adoption of RPA in internal audit department. Many internal audit departments are already going fast forward on that. They have achieved significant success in automating a whole lot of audit operations. So I think the answer to that question would be, if we transform ourselves in terms of our skill sets, I think we would be valuable. Else, it could be a question mark.
Thanks, sir. Next question is from Sahil.
Yeah, so Chanchal, this question and hold the other questions so that we'll go ahead with the sessions and take it after a while. So you go ahead with this question. Yeah.
Okay. Is these domains of enterprise risk review and cyber risk management not the part of current IIA activity? What phase of this domain can be seen post-lockdown?
Well, I'm talking from my experience, the global research, and what's happening generally in a couple of the verticals, including the regulated verticals. So unfortunately, cybersecurity from an internal audit perspective, scope of work in many cases is still new. As I said, there are two problems with that. One, to get the kind of capability, because much of this capability to do technical audits is very special, and this is more specific to a particular environment. So you cannot keep a resource hired within your department for long when you have only once in a year to do an audit. So we'll have to work out the resourcing profile. But more importantly, to answer your question, there are still a whole lot of internal audit departments which do not take active role when it comes to cybersecurity audits. It is either generally outsourced, which is okay, not wrong to outsource, but as we know that when you outsource, you have to define the entire audit objectives and see what needs to be done. So the understanding of the risk certainly needs to be there, and that is where many of the departments are still kind of coming up to speed on that, and that is where the complexion changes. So I see that this will certainly improve in the coming days to come. So Chanchal, if we can just stop here for any further questions, and then we'll take those after a while. Is it fine?
Sure, sir. Okay,
great. So first, let us look at the importance of cybersecurity that is getting across the world. And if you look at one of the most celebrated surveys, which is the Productivity CEO Top Risk Survey, which they ask leaders from multiple verticals across the globe, what are your top risks? And this is from a business risk point of view. And if you see the 2019, you'll find many of them relate to technology. So many of them, if you see, I only pointed out two here, but if you really look at almost 50% of what you see as the top risks are digital or something related to the digital. So there's very much, one, it is flowing from the regulatory requirements, because as we know, after GDPR, the privacy landscape has completely changed when it comes to how you deal with customer data. But not only that, I think a lot of regulators have been giving various directions wherein there is significant amount of cybersecurity requirements which the organizations have to comply with, and there are stringent penalties for not doing that. So that is certainly very much on the cards. And in context, if you really see, in fact, this is from one of the institutes of IBM, and they say that they do this study of what is the cost of an average breach. And in India, they did it 2 years back, and they found that the cost of the average breach has risen by 8%. So it's costing about 12 crores is what they said about 2 years back. I guess it's certainly up from then, because we are seeing significant attacks in the last year on many of the long-standing banks and enterprises wherein a lot of data has been stolen. They are also saying that the average per capita cost of per lost record is again at about 5,000 rupees. That is, per record lost is at about 5,000 rupees is the kind of figure that they put at. And how do you arrive at that cost? I'll explain later, but it considers not only the tangible losses, but also the intangible losses, the legal costs, a whole lot of how do you fix that, all that comes in there. Now look at the 2020 top risks, and believe me, you'll find, in fact, the number of digital risks is equal or more. In fact, there are more of cyber risks as well, which I got added, and you see that cyber threats and privacy identity threats are already there. But then if you see, very significant is organizations are looking at the risk of their ability to compete with the startups, which is the Bond Digital and other competitors, because if you remember, Amazon, how they started off was as a very small entity, and they only challenged the more than decades old bookshops of Higginbotham's and Barnes and Nobles. But once they started selling online, in no time, with zero investment, almost near zero investment, they became so big, and today you know where they stand. But then mind you, as business keeps on moving, Walmart is now challenging Amazon, and mind you, the entire Walmart strategy is at the core is data. So that's how they work. So I think this kind of highlights where internal audit needs to move, and are we aligned with the board thinking, or what the board needs to think. This is from ISACA's IT risk IT document, and it kind of well summarizes why information technology risk is all pervading, and why it is important that whatever be the domain of scope of audit that we cover, I think the digital risk, associated digital risk, need to be looked in context of the operations. What does it mean? For example, I am auditing, let us say, vendor payments. I mean, we need to understand the channel of payment that is used for making this. If it is completely digital, we need to understand there are risks around that. It certainly increases the efficiency of operations, but we have to make sure that the risks are well addressed in terms of the controls. So that is where, if you see here, with regard to enterprise risks, with regard to strategic risk, environmental risk, market risk, credit risk, whatever be the risk, IT risk, which is information risk, is a substantum to the entire thing. So the question really is, if we look at our audit plan or audit programs, does it reflect this position? Is where the question that we need to ask. If not, I think there is work to do for all of us, because information is what is the breadth of business. So that is something which we need to make sure that once it goes digital, we need to get it right. Now, I'm not getting to too much of the attacks, because you can read a lot on attacks, but just to give you one example, a couple of years back, 2017, December, if I'm right, one of the largest chain of stores, Target, they got targeted by a cyber attack. This is a retail shop, a typical physical shop, but they had gone in for automation to the extent of point of sale systems, wherein you swipe a card, you buy whatever you want. But mind you, the hackers knew that the security was not really on the radar of this organization. They were able to exploit the vulnerabilities through the back doors. It is not that Target did not do anything on cybersecurity. They did, but it was more of a technically focused venture rather than looking at it as the digital risk venture. And that kind of, unfortunately, led to significant amount of problems. The audit was clueless about what was happening. And unfortunately, what happened, the hackers entered through vulnerabilities in their vendor portal, and they were able to get into the controlling system for all the POS systems, and they were able to install a malware which would scrap the card data before it gets into the enterprise systems. And there was a whole lot of damage that was done. 40 million credit card information stolen, 110 million customer information stolen. Quite a lot of damage happened. But for the first time, because of that, the amount of reputation damage that Target suffered was phenomenal. Not only that, their stock prices fell, their brand image fell. There's a whole lot of damage that was done. Many of the customers started filing suits because their private information was compromised. So a whole lot of things happened. So this is where I think is a lesson. Last year, I'm sure you had seen that there was attacks on banks. We had the Cosmos Bank attack, wherein almost the entire reserves were completely wiped off by the hackers, and they used some very, very advanced techniques through the payment systems, through the SWIFT and the ATM systems to enter the weaknesses and exploit them and cost the organization their existence. So very, very difficult lessons. Similarly, we had a couple of other banks also suffering from similar kind of problems. So the point really is, we have to understand that the threat landscape when it comes to cybersecurity and its impact on business is transforming like nobody's business. So it is very important that it's part of our business to understand these risks and see that as internal auditors, are we challenging the enterprise controls enough to make sure that the controls are robust and adequate. So we have to understand that every cybersecurity attack is from the impact on the enterprise and the stakeholders. As we see here, we have the customers, the regulators, and the competition who are part of your ecosystem. And each of them, I'm just taking 3 of them there, but each of them have their expectations. For example, if you are a customer, you are the customer of a bank, or even let us say something like Amazon or Flipkart.com. What is the basic expectation? Trust and confidence. You know, or you believe that these enterprises would protect your data that you're supplying to them on their portals or whatever, and they will make sure that your confidence in them is kept up. Which means if you are sitting in Flipkart or Amazon.com as part of the risk management or internal audit team, you have a huge responsibility, because customer trust, it just takes one instance to take it off, because there is so much of media that it can blow it out of proportions. So we have to be extremely cautious to say, how do we understand the risk and the impact thereof? Regulations, we know that there's a lot of e-compliance, e-filing which is happening, but the big question always is the onus back on the organization to prove that whatever they had done is done. And unfortunately, if you see the way that we go about today, many of the organizations fail to maintain their own uploaded copies, or they rather scramble through that because they know it's available on site. But then it is important that you have your communication in place just in case something goes wrong. But there are a whole lot of things. It's just an example, but there are a whole lot of compliance related issues when it comes to from a cybersecurity perspective. And the competition is always looking at being one upon you. And today, if you see, cybersecurity is an edge when it comes to marketing. I'm sure you have seen one of the banks which markets their savings bank account as a safe, a cyber safe savings bank account. So it is becoming a marketing thing too, because they understand that the customer's mind on top of it is a worry about it. So what are the damages that it can cause? Plenty, believe me. And look at the kind of the financial damages. Of course, money stolen, financial penalties, damages, legal expenses, investigations, fixing expenses, insurance costs, go on, right? But then the more dangerous thing is the intangible losses like reputation, loss of market share, loss of loyal customers, targeted for increased inspections. So you saw that even when this particular bank was attacked, they had a huge problem in handling the many of the inspections from other departments. So this becomes very normal. And employee morale goes down, cybersecurity director exits happen, you become a target of more attacks, and people start stealing because they know that your defenses are weak. So when I look at the internal auditor's role, believe me, the internal auditor is best placed to look at the business perspective of cybersecurity. Why? Because internal auditors understand the business of the enterprise well. They understand risks and controls very well. They understand regulations very well. And the only gap that really remains is the technology gap. So if we kind of brace up on the technology gap, I think we will lead in terms of the role of protecting the enterprise when it comes to cybersecurity. In fact, the boards often face this problem when it comes to the CISO or the IT department telling them something on cybersecurity. Today, of course, cybersecurity is certainly boardroom discussion, which happens for a long time in many boards. But then the problem only is many directors, they have this doubt. They're saying, what is the question that I should ask when a CISO comes for a presentation or when the security teams come for a presentation? Because this is something which I don't understand. I understand business, but I can't understand technology because it's so jargonish and it keeps on confusing with new jargons. So I really don't know what questions to ask. So what happened was, this is way back in 2014, the American Corporate Directors Association and the Institute of Internal Auditors, they came together and they coined 5 questions that directors need to ask. And these I would think are very important because it kind of gives you the board's view on what they're expecting. And that kind of helps us to kind of define our work. Number 1, the first thing to be understood is that cybersecurity is not an IT department issue. It is an enterprise-wide digital risk management issue. So that's one thing which has always been a misnomer in many boards, saying, oh, call the IT department. It's not just IT department. It's something which is much, much larger than that. Also very important to understand, because we have got increased number of cybersecurity regulations which have been happening across the globe. The Personal Data Protection Act bill, as you know, is in the Parliament. It was likely to be passed last winter, but then I think once things return to normal, I think that would get a greater impetus. But not only that, if you look at a whole lot of regulations which require, whether it is SEBI directives or the Reserve Bank of India, which has got a very, very detailed and stringent directives on cybersecurity for the banking sector, for the insurance sector, the IRDA has directives. So it's very important to understand what are the legal implications of cyber risks. Not only that, the Indian Penal Code and the Information Technology Act themselves are significant because we need to understand how the cyber is dealt with when it comes to in context of these laws. It also says that boards should have adequate access to cybersecurity expertise. We have to understand that cybersecurity is very complex and it is multifaceted. It has got too many products, too many things happening, too many technologies, all of them fast forward, innovating themselves day by day. So it is very important to get the right kind of experts who will advise the board and keep them on their heels. And I have seen that many of the board meetings that I advise on, they are very, very keen to know the articulation from the technology risk side to what it means from the business process and the stakeholder side. And that is exactly where I think we internal auditors need to brace up. They also are, of course, the next question is, directors should set expectations that managements will establish as an enterprise-wide risk management framework. So we know that many of the organizations, we have our enterprise risk management framework, the IFC framework, but it's still unfortunate that many of these IFCs or the risk management frameworks do not consider IT risk and cybersecurity risk in the depth that it should be. And that is where it kind of just comes in as maybe just a kind of, one of those issues. That's where it just kind of stops. Board management discussion on cyber risk. I think a lot of things happening now, but the big problem always is identification of the risks and how do we avoid them or accept them, mitigate them, transfer them, maybe through insurance, through outsourcing. But these are all very important questions that need to be asked. And that is where we need to understand that if we outsource risk, the accountability for managing the risk still stays with the enterprise, and which is a big misnomer in many of the entities I have seen. They say, well, the vendors handles that, and the vendor doesn't have any security controls, whereas you have significant amount of regulatory controls. So that I think most regulators are catching up on what is called the cyber, supply chain security. So ask these questions is what we need to understand. We are in the midst of a crisis now, but then we have to ask this fundamental question. Just imagine the home links going down now, and even this session, God forbid, if the session goes down, the entire business stops. I mean, we have never really considered this as part of our risk assessment exercises, I guess. And if you have done that, you've done a good job. So the big question that needs to be asked is, as an internal audit department, as the board, do you have a finger on the top cyber attacks that your organization is or could be vulnerable to? Not only cyber attacks, any kind of risks that could jeopardize your business carrying on as normal. Very important. We never look at who is going to be interested in you. It is very important to know the enemy. As the Sun Tzu Art of War says, know yourself, but also know the enemy. So we don't really see who could be enemy. And unfortunately, it turns out that it could be either insiders or somebody who's left your organization, or it could be innocent people. In fact, we have seen that the resumes of the organization that people post, they give all the information of the projects that they do. This is a very high risk, and they put it on everywhere. Your whatever job portals, this, that, everywhere. So if I was a hacker, all I need to do is pick out all those employees who are applying for jobs outside the organization, look at what all they have done. I can put together a reasonable picture about what's going within your entity, what kind of systems you use. This is very high risk, I must say. Then also very important question to ask, how much of a current security really works? And I'm sure this COVID-19 is an excellent kind of situation to really see whether all your BCP really worked, all that security really worked, whether the virtual private networks worked. But the problem generally is when you put on the VPN, the bandwidth goes down, so you're not able to continue the session. So many enterprises say, okay, put off your VPN, you just come through the normal channel because otherwise we cannot discuss. So which means that the security just doesn't work. And very important for especially the internal audit to say, what methods do we use to assess cybersecurity resilience? Have we questioned on pandemic planning for cybersecurity? Have we questioned on pandemic planning for digital enterprise? So these are questions that we need to go back to the drawing board, because generally what happens is, unless and until we have a very robust kind of framework, pandemic planning doesn't really figure in any of our drills even. So that becomes a problem. What is the level of awareness of cyber attacks and risk? We have to understand that the people are your best firewall. An aware employee can avoid an attack. So have we really worked on that front? In fact, working from home, many of the organizations are happy that employees are working very well, but please understand there are going to be a lot of emotional, psychological issues which are surfacing. Our homes are not made for work from home in everybody's homes. There are people who are working in very small apartments with their kids running about. They need the room. They have a 2-room apartment. So a lot of problems which we could see, and the system could be shared between them and the kids. So these are kind of things which we need to foresee and see how do we really look at factoring all that empathetically when we look at the risks of working from home. And importantly, do we have a cybersecurity response plan? If, let us say, the entire network gets compromised, as in the case of one of these enterprises where their entire email systems came down in spite of their best preparedness, we have to understand that we are moving from focusing too much on just the preventive controls and not focusing on detective and the recovery, the corrective controls earlier, to making sure we are giving good importance to the detect and the correct part. So today it is considered okay to get attacked, but important to come back quickly with least damage. So that's where resilience is. Ultimate thing, whether your cyber crisis management will work. That's a fundamental question, and how do you keep it current? So we traditionally, as I said, have been looking at the prevent part of the controls, putting in lots and lots of policies, procedures, technologies, but never really looked at will it work? So that's the question when it needs to be. The BCP drills, the kind of umpteen number of checklists, call trees. So that is where the next question comes. Have we put in enough systems and processes in place to detect before an incident really happens? Do we know that before an incident is going to happen, it's going to happen? Do we have that capability? Last but not the least, how good are we when an attack happens? We'll be able to respond to it, reduce the damage, and get back to work within no time, with the customer not even experiencing any downtime or any service disruption. So that is where we are moving to in terms of the the global thinking on this. I mean, let us look at it. How does the internal audit really need to look at it? This is a big question, because a lot of questions get posed to me in many of the sessions saying, well, technology doesn't come to me easily. Well, it's too much of complex to me. And, I kind of feel a mind block with technology. Well, you don't have to go into the core of technology, and because once you ask a question to a tech guy and he kind of comes out with a jargonish reply, you don't know what to do next, because you don't know what is the next question. But your question is not answered, and that is where it is important for us to focus on what we know better, start from there, and stick to our control objectives with regard to what we want. And that is where it is very important to understand information from its security risk perspective. And that is where I think digital risk management is going to be a very, very important aspect that as internal auditors, we'll have to see that the enterprises are prepared for. As you see in this case, you could be handling customers or employees' names, addresses, date of birth, email ID, mobile numbers, but we know how these were traditionally considered. Well, what's wrong in sharing all this? But you know that hackers can now get hold of just your mobile number and hack your bank account. It's not very difficult to do that. So they can enter through various means and do a lot of damage. And then you have your sensitive information, which comes under the Information Technology Act, classified as sensitive personal data information, like financial information, health information, secret information like passwords and pins and etc. So the question really is, like in your home, you don't treat all assets with the same value, but you have zones in which you keep them. So if the asset is very, very valuable to you, you keep it in a particular zone. But then unfortunately in an enterprise, the most crown jewels could be lying in the emails that's on the mobiles. And that's exactly where we need to understand that if we have not understood data classification, I think all cybersecurity will become one big fiasco. So it's very important to put a data perspective to that and then get into technology. Then ask the question, tell me as a customer, through which of these applications or whatever this technology is my information traveling? And the next question to ask is, what does this device or application do to my customer's information? So once we start asking these questions, we clearly understand whether is it really required. In many of the cases, you'll find that the audit would surprisingly find that much of the sensitive data is flowing onto platforms, especially vendor platforms, where it is not even required. So once you put information which is sensitive into platform where it is not required and insecure, you are clearly exposing yourself. And mind you, there are a whole lot of people who are interested in your information. And it is important as part of your audit strategy to also ask, do we know who is interested in the enterprise information? There could be hackers, there could be state actors, there could be government and regulatory organizations, there could be competitors, there could be marketers, but very simple employees who could be there as part of that. So that is the perspective that we need to do, because if we get otherwise into the technology front, we are going to be in very deep problems, please understand. Because as we see here, I mean, this is how a technology stack looks like, and unless and until you are at least reasonably competent with understanding technology, you may land up in a serious kind of trouble, because you don't know what question to ask and it is so confusing. But if you simply ask the question, why should I bother about something called as a system software, and then I say, okay, oh, it contains my customer data, my bank account information, okay, then what does it do to this information? So once we start asking these questions, I think we'll start getting the answers more easily. So this is kind of summarizes that to say how we should look at it, because after all, what we are trying to do in all cybersecurity is protect this enterprise data with regard to its attributes of confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Any unauthorized disclosure, unauthorized modification to the state of data or the processing, or the data not being available when it needs to be available either to the customer or for any purpose of business. So that is where the entire thing of controls comes in. That is where you see the people process technology, the cybersecurity policy, the procedures, and all that, as you know, comes in there. And that's exactly where we have to understand this should be the approach to cracking the complexity of cybersecurity. Okay, so I'm just going to just skip over certain slide in the interest of time, but I'll stop here for any further questions. We'll take about 3 questions. Chanchal, if you could please help me out with that.
Yes, sir. Question from Piyush. On the one hand, we have trained IA professionals, and on the other hand, IT experts. Does post-COVID-19 time would need the convergence of the two? Convergence of the two.
Yes, the answer is a significant yes, but making sure that the tenets of internal audit are kept in mind, because if it is an audit operation and if you are going to consult the person who is the auditee and take his help on understanding that, you must keep in mind that there is a very important requirement of independence and objectivity. So it is important that yes, you certainly will need a lot of expertise that you will need to get from outside, because it is, as I said, it's not possible practically to keep every piece of capability within the organization. But the internal auditor should be in command of the control objective. They should know what exactly needs to be achieved. They can always translate the nitty-gritty of technology into how it delivers. They can get an assurance through exercises like penetration testing and vulnerability assessments to see whether the objectives are really being met or not. So these are very much that something the internal audit department can make use of skill sets which are either outsourced or through group shared services or whatever, and they can achieve that.
Sir, next question from Vasant. Importance of work from home policy in the IS policy, whether to be redefined?
Well, I think yes, it is going to happen, because as I said, because of the very situation, this is certainly likely to continue even if we don't want to work from home for some more time. But let me tell you, many organizations have tasted the benefits of work from home. There are also a class of employees who prefer working from home. So it is going to be a new normal, as I said, and once you have the different ownership of different assets, how information flows, I think you would need to put in adequate controls in place. So I see that the entire technology for security will get redefined. There would be significant amount of rules that the organization would come up with when it comes to work from home. I think that's going to be a new normal. That's certainly something which is very much on the cards.
Thank you, sir. Another question from Arun. What about job opportunity in cybersecurity?
Oh, tremendous. Tremendous is an understatement, because please understand, when the entire world, everybody is wanting to go digital, the first thing that comes there is risk management. And risk management, wherein a person who is adept at the risks controls and assurance understands that and gives the assurance saying that yes, this is safe. Imagine you are going to buy an autonomous car. Obviously the top of your mind is, while you certainly want that piece of equipment, but the biggest thing on your mind is the safety of your family and yourself. So you would certainly like an assurance to say from an expert, yes, this is safe to travel. Please understand, in an autonomous car, you could be not just doing traveling, but you'll be doing a whole lot of things. So while you are driving, when I say driving, autonomous driving, you'll be shopping, you'll be paying for electricity bills. So which means there is going to be enough gadgetry in that autonomous car to really do all that, connect with all those vendors to the various partners and achieve what you want to do. Even with the Alexa or the Google Dot at home, you see that there is already issues of whether it is spying on you or not, because it is sitting in your bedroom or drawing room, possibly listening to everything. So these questions already are spurring cybersecurity, a need for cybersecurity professionals. Believe me, internal auditors as cybersecurity professionals will be a deadly combination, because you understand the business side, you understand risks and processes, and you also understand the technology. So that is going to be a killer combination. And already the world is facing a severe glut of availability of cybersecurity professionals. In fact, while the regulations are continuously mandating appointment of CISOs in many institutions, there are not really enough competent people available who can really take the challenge of the fast-moving technology with the risks and what needs to be done. So cybersecurity is very much one of the very promising areas to be in, if you have the inclination to do that. I think I'll stop here, Chanchal, so we can go ahead with the session.
Sure, sir.
Okay. So I'm just going to, in the interest of time, fast forward some of these slides so that we can come to a kind of key messages that I want to deliver. Excuse me. So use of emerging technologies. Now, don't think that emerging technology is something necessarily fancy. It could be a very simple thing like a Paytm. Okay, so you have a new technology which can, using a barcode or whatever, you can make you pay a kind of typical QR code or whatever. That's a kind of new tech, because it is solving a business problem in a completely different way. So each of these technologies obviously is popular because it solves a business problem or a customer experience enhancement. But when we look at that, it is very important. As I said, trust is something which is never spoken. It is for the organization to ensure that the trust is there. Otherwise, you will have an exodus of customers once something fails. For example, if your bank said that, sorry, we cannot ensure you that you can trust us with regard to your money, will you ever go to that bank? Obviously, you will not. So it is very important for organizations to stand up to that. That is where, if you see, there are a whole lot of changes in the threat environment, which demands that you're continuously updated, continuously watching what's happening. If you see cloud, there is a whole lot of discussion whether it is safe or not. Let us please understand that the technology inherently is not safe. Let us please understand that, because it is like putting your kid in the crèche, wherein there are multiple children from different families, and you cannot keep on monitoring what's exactly happening inside, and sometimes they don't allow you to do that. So in any kind of multi-tenanted environment, you will find a lot of audit handicaps which would not be able to achieve on a regular, and that's kind of becoming a very big issue with the cloud environment. Because can you, like you audit your organization, audit the entity that is hosting your cloud ERP or your cloud instance? Because every control there is as important as you would do it in the organization. But that's where you have, as of now, certain other alternates like independent assurances like SOC 2 and SOC 1, the ISO 27001. But all of them, it all depends upon the type of business you are in, what kind of information you put on the cloud model. So this is where I think internal audit has to play a very important role when it comes to confidently adopting emerging technologies from a business risk perspective. Okay, there are a whole lot of, if you take the banking business obviously is a favorite of attackers because there's money, and there have been a whole lot of technologies which in India we have seen, which in fact even many countries have not even taken as yet. So we got very good steps that have been taken by our country. The kind of digital channels of payment that are available are phenomenal. But mind you, while the government and the regulators are taking every step to make them secure, but we have to understand that with the kind of mobile phones that there in our country and the kind of customers that they use that, and the different kind of banks that we have, starting from MNCs to the smallest payment banks or the cooperative banks, there is a huge task to be done. So the auditors play a very significant role in risk management. Take this example. This was the launch of a UPI app by one of these banks, and mind you, what happened here was one of the customers, let's say he is having a balance of 5,000 rupees. He transfers 3,000 rupees and he finds that the balance still remains 5,000. Obviously he is happy. So what does he do next? Again tries transferring 3,000. So he has already transferred 6,000 and the beneficiary has also got the money, but the balance still remains 5,000. So which means you are really happy, isn't it? So you keep on doing that and you make any amount of money using that app. So it's like a kind of a wishing app or a Kamadhanu or whatever you call it, where it keeps on giving you money. But then what happened in this case was the guy was just a customer, but obviously a little crooked. So what he did was, once he found that the app kept on letting him transfer money, he started telling everybody else in the village. And that is how the cyber crime capital, as it was earlier called, of course now there are many more, Jamtara was born, which is a small place, but mind you, there are a lot of enough criminal minds there. And within a matter of no time, the bank was robbed of 25 crores. So balances did not reduce, but money money was taken out. So where was the problem? Did they not take care of security? Well, they did. But what happened was the bank side looked at only the bank side of application security and the technology security. The vendor only looked at his side of security. Integration testing was not done. The big question really would be, okay, one is the cybersecurity guy, why did he do his job? But also internal audit, why didn't you really audit it? That could be a question. So this is exactly where I think we as auditors need to be very, very careful of our roles, because we certainly are responsible for challenging and ensuring robust risk management in the enterprise. So looking at our role, I think these are the capabilities that we'll need to build. If you already have them, I must congratulate you. But if you don't, I think it's time to build. One, very good capabilities with regard to enterprise cyber risk assessment, because the auditors will need to do an independent risk assessment of any digital venture in the enterprise, any digital project, to really evaluate what the risks are. And you have to be experts in assessment of integrated risks. Don't think that you'll have one person specializing cybersecurity, so when you get a cybersecurity audit, you'll send that guy. No, it can't work like that. If, let us say, there is a treasury management software and it uses certain technologies which spans different vendors, both of them got to get together, make sure that the overall control objectives are clearly understood, and there is an integrated audit that is done. So integrated audits are very much now going to be and already are in many enterprises the way to go. A very important piece which many organizations don't take seriously is data classification. Going back to what I said earlier, in your home, all your belongings are not of the same value to you. Possibly a letter that your teacher wrote when you were in class 12 could be much more valuable than anything else, or that your father wrote to you could be much more than valuable than anything else. So value is something that is just, interpreted at the enterprise level, and risk is also interpreted according to the risk aptitude of the organization. So how much of appetite of risk you have is what determines how amount of controls you put in there. So it is very important that, considering that, you clearly classify your data to say, okay, this is the class of data that needs to be very highly secure. So what happens is, you have a focus to say, okay, what should I look at? Should I look at every piece of technology and say, oh, is it secure to the utmost? It can never be, because it all costs money. And mind you, in business, it all risk and reward. So data classification, risk assessment are those two key pillars which are the glue that binds the business side with the technology side and the risk side. So as auditors, it is very important to make sure that the organization has a data classification policy. There are enough amount of procedures and controls which implement the data classification across the systems, and they are run in real time. So because it's not otherwise practically possible to do that. So it's very important that such classification, for example, email, it is very important to make sure that you segregate between what is a very highly sensitive email on, let us say, the strategy of an organization coming from a CEO to certain people in the organization, from one that is the next month's salary. So there are completely different perspectives to each of these data classes. And obviously, unless and until you have a technology that can help you handle the level of security to be automatically applied, it won't work. So, but the fundamental point is to have a data classification criteria. So I must say that organizations yet, at least from my experience, are not really there except for the very mature cream a la cream ones. So that's going to be a huge problem because that's a huge ask. So I think internal audit can play a significant role when it comes to risk assessment, cybersecurity risk assessment, and data classification. And that's what would lead to the internal audit driving a digital GRC capability in the enterprise. Cybersecurity governance is going to be extremely essential because even today the boards are not confident when it comes to security. It's the internal audit which has to give them the business confidence to say, yes, this is where we stand. Attack and threat modeling is also now a very required part of threat intelligence, which is very popular and becoming more popular in most of the enterprises. So that is something which certainly involves understanding of the business side of the information architecture and mapping it to the technology. So that's where the need for the auditors to also have capabilities with regard to information architecture, how to evaluate vendor cybersecurity. I already told you about threat intel, intelligence response, incident response, resilience, of course IT compliance, because the act or the regulator might say something which is technical or could be only at a control objective level. For example, if you take GDPR doesn't say anything significant on technology, but mind you, all the controls need to be implemented within the core of technology. So it is very important to understand the control objective or what the legal requirement is and translate that to see whether the effectiveness of that is done. So all this requires that there is continual risk-based assessment of cybersecurity, of the design, of the operating effectiveness, and ensure that the audit plan and audit are done appropriately. So that is where I think brings to the importance of the Institute of Internal Auditors 3 lines of defense, and cybersecurity is no different. There are responsibilities to done at the first line of defense, at the second line of defense, and the third line of defense. I would urge you to go and look at a very excellent document at the Institute of Internal Auditors site, which is on cybersecurity and internal audit, and you can get a significant amount of information on how this works. Okay, I'm just going to skip this slide, but this is just based upon what I was speaking earlier, which is with regard to the cybersecurity framework. And we have to understand this picture very clearly, because when you really look at customer service delivery, when I say customer service delivery, it could be any person who uses information as the person who consumes the information. It could be a manager, it could be a junior employee, it could be a customer, it could be a vendor, it could be anybody, the auditor, the regulator, anybody. But please understand, the information customer service delivery has a lot of layers down beneath it, and every layer, unless and until the internal controls with regard to the security objectives work fine, we cannot really achieve the cybersecurity objective of the enterprise. So it is a kind of a very complex, well-designed, interconnected set of internal controls that need to work. Because if you look at the kind of attacks, if you take the Bank of Bangladesh attack, the hackers studied all the internal control lapses over a period of time, then only launched the attack. So they clearly could know what is the gaps in procedure, what is the gaps in employee integrity, what is the gaps in the type of equipment, outdated equipment being used, what is the gaps in the application software, what is the gaps in security applications. So they understood everything and they designed attacks which could target it. And that is where, as you know, they tried to transfer $1 billion, of course, because of errors. Ultimately, unfortunately, 81 million was transferred. Some of it recovered, but mind you, it took a really tall order. So that is where I think the entire context needs to be understood. There is an business information layer in technology where internal audit should have no problem. The only problem, if at all, should be the underlying technology layer, and that is where we need to build up competencies. And once we understand that, as I said, internal audit would be the most efficient to perform that. The document, I said, I'm also not going to go into the details of this for want of time, but there are the Institute of Internal Auditors Cybersecurity GTAC, it talks about 10 questions that the chief audit executive needs to ask, and I would think that these are very, very useful. So it asks about, first, on the governance level. Again, if you see, it aligns with the NACD documentation, which the 5 questions which the board needs to ask. It asks about, are the senior management and the governing body, which includes the audit committee, the board of directors, etc., aware about the key risks related to cybersecurity. So when you say key risks, please understand we are looking at the business risk of cybersecurity and not merely the technical risk of cybersecurity, because the board needs to be more understanding from a stakeholders impact perspective rather than merely to understand the technical perspective. The next question also is, are there enough cybersecurity initiatives which receive the funding and the support of the board? So there are very important things, that that the board has a buy-in on cybersecurity being important to the enterprise. B, they are prepared to support in terms of funds as well as the management support for this entire initiative. Then comes the very important aspect of risk assessment. Excuse me. As I said, a cybersecurity risk assessment is a very, very important part of the enterprise risk assessment, and should be so. The internal audit, as part of its risk-based approach, also needs to take a risk-based approach to cybersecurity. You cannot go about saying, oh, tell me which are all the sensitive technologies I'll audit it. It's not going to serve any purpose. It has to be in the context of the business of the enterprise and what is the transaction leg and the kind of technology that supports it. So that is why it is very important to understand the threats, the breaches that have happened, and see that where are we on that and how do we map to the industry. So that's where it will tell you that how much of water are you in as an enterprise. Very important to collaboration, because as we saw the 3 lines of defense, every line needs to complement each other and work in tandem, and they need to work under the directions of the board and the audit committee. And cybersecurity is a very, very engaging requirement there. So that is where there are the frontliners who would need to do their jobs, but the internal auditor's job is to see that they are appropriately defined. There is enough understanding and capability with regard to each of the frontliners when it comes to the first line of defense, and the second line support them with all the required support with regard to helping them to achieve their objectives, and continuously monitoring to see if they are getting done or not. And obviously the audit's role, which we'll discuss later, is very important to independently challenge that. And like in any management framework, cybersecurity also requires a policy. And please understand, when we say cybersecurity, and earlier we called it information security, cybersecurity is about the connectedness of the enterprise. When you are doing an Amazon.com transaction on your mobile, please understand how many vendor systems, how many accounting books it will flow through before really achieving that entire transaction. So that is where cybersecurity becomes extremely essential, because it's not just one leg of transaction. Oh, I've done my enterprise, I'm done. No, the entire value chain in terms of cybersecurity needs to be done. And that's exactly where the need for collaboration with vendors, working with them, is very, very important. There needs to be synchronization of what is being audited. So we need to have a synchronized response, synchronized kind of assurance to say that all this will work. So that's where you, of course, you need the policies, the procedures in place. Training is no doubt extremely essential, and this is the best of the times to get all the training that you want. And it's good that so much is happening which is free of cost, and you can get your time on that. Detection is very important, because unless and until you know something is going wrong, you cannot know after it has gone wrong. In fact, you may not live to see it. A very simple example would be a smoke detector in a physical sense. If the smoke detector were not to detect the smoke and sound an alarm, you would be burned down. The entire enterprise doesn't exist. Similarly, in cybersecurity risk, when the attack is brewing, there should be enough competency in the organization in terms of technology, people, and processes for timely identification that there is something suspicious going on, so that you turn your attention to that and see if it deserves to be attended to. And that's exactly where the monitoring controls comes in. And if you see many of the organizations, especially in regulated sectors like the bank, legally, regulatorily mandate having a security operations center, which is completely focused on detection, response, and recovery. And of course, very important to have a management review. Your MANCO meetings need to have in their agenda cybersecurity. So the feedback mechanisms, what you tell the board, how is it presented, what are the red, green, amber lights that would give the indication to the management of their confidence. So all that is very important. And also very important to keep the management update on what's happening on the cybersecurity landscape, both with regard to your industry, your competitors, as well as globally. Because if it is merely one technology, like a particular technology which is getting hacked, you would rather be interested if that technology is deployed in your organization infrastructure. Then of course the requirement of a response plan, very important question to ask. Does the management have an effective response procedure in place in the event of a cyber attack or a cyber threat? So very important to make sure that there is not only, like this pandemic is a very clear testing point for that, if you really succeeded in or not. So that is where that's something which you must keep in mind when you're doing that. And then have these all been communicated? As we know, the importance of communication of all this. So internal cyber audit is a very important pillar, of this entire thing, because the internal audit needs to be capable of assessing processes, controls to mitigate cyber threats. And the CAE also needs to ask whether he has considered as part of his plan, as a department plan, the need for upskilling or acquiring skills, partnering skills for whatever needs to get done in the enterprise. Then comes vendor management. So very important to know what are your dependencies on your value chain, especially in terms of access to your data, dependency on other systems, because all that could obviously have inherent risks in that. And that is where internal auditors' role to really do examination of each and every vendor in the system and assure that they are safe and they continue to remain safe. Then of course a very important aspect is the today, which is building up the threat intelligence. So as we always have seen that in the last couple of years, business intelligence on business risks is a very important aspect which internal audit needs to be also one up on. So very important to see whether internal audit itself understands where are the threats coming from, what are the new emerging threats. There could be nation states, criminals, activists, network system, cloud service providers, any number you could have. And have we incorporate all that as part of our internal audit risk assessment as part of the process. So very simple, what is expected of internal audit is business says, don't give me surprises from cybersecurity. And there is while that's easily said than done, because you need to be capable of identifying potential threats, protecting your information assets, detecting any attacks as they arise, responding them to a timely manner, and recovering from that. And the kind of previous 10 questions also outline the kind of broad contours of your audit program. But there is need to continuously monitor and assure. So the frequency of audit needs to be planned very, very well. Some of them need to be real-time auditing. You cannot say, oh, this will be done once in a quarter. No. Payment systems, for example, you need to possibly put in an audit engine there, which will take care of all the key controls as they happen. So you cannot say that, oh, we lost so many crores, but then, okay, this is very identified. The board is not prepared to listen to all that. So how do we achieve all this? What is the right approach? First, get a handle of the enterprise digital and related cyber risk perspective. Very important to engage with the stakeholders across the 3 lines of defense. Get a sign off on the independent risk perspectives. Ensure that the management, the first and second lines of defense incorporate the agreed on cyber risk controls into their day-to-day operations and they are performing it. Put in place a risk-based cybersecurity audit framework. Draw up a risk-based cybersecurity audit plans. Execute the independent audit, independent objective audits. Very important. Why the internal audit department needs to play this role is because of its independence and objectivity. And that is why, as I said to the earlier question also, you cannot on an audit subject or an audit scope that is planned with an auditee, you cannot go and sit with him and say, okay, now tell me how does this technology work. well, he will help you out. I'm not saying no, but you got to make sure that you are independent and objective, and there should be no conflict of interest. So build, acquire partner skills, very important. Any amount of training is going to be inadequate. So I think the message is very clear. Unless and until we upskill, there is not really an opportunity there. And keep building requisite tooling platforms, because the future is all about tooling. So there are enough organizations which have already adopted that. Many of the large professional firms, they have built their own platforms for audit tooling. And there is a lot of lessons that you can build your tools on your own. There are a lot of freeware that can help you. But of course, there are already organizations which are doing that in a big way. So a need for proactive and regular engagement with the business, and of course make sure that the operational side will not interfere in audits, because unfortunately what happens is that they would come and tell you something, and then you don't know how to react to that if you don't understand what it is. So it's very important that you develop that competency on that. So the takeaways, I think very clearly, internal audits has a very critical role, I would think, in the coming days, especially where it's going to be accentuated because of this COVID-19 in enterprise security governance and preparedness, and that's going to be the key to cybersecurity effectiveness. And obviously, IIA will need to ensure that the business context of cybersecurity is understood, controls are put in place, more from a framework perspective, driven by a framework rather than ad hoc controls. And we have to understand that cybersecurity, like all other controls, is a very, very fine combination. In fact, a more finer combination of people, process, and technology. And the responsibilities are spread across the 3 lines of defense. Unfortunately, there is a lot of work to be done here, because there is a lot of digital illiteracy amongst the first lines of defense, which needs to be addressed. They need to be empowered to do that. The internal audit plays a key role in ensuring capability to, as I said, identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover from cyber attacks in a manner that the business will not suffer. And last but not the least, that IIA needs to ensure that cyber resilience is adequate when it comes to, whatever needs to get done. And I believe me, that often is today the difference between survival and success. In fact, I have often been asked the question, is not cybersecurity, cyber attacks too hyped? Cosmos Bank is the best example. A 200-year-old bank, within a matter of 3 days, lost the kind of money, which is 75 crores if I remember right. And mind you, they are not even able to get up. So it takes a whole lot of time to really get back to that again. So we have to understand that cybersecurity does not happen daily, but if it happens, you may not live to see it as an enterprise. So with this, I'll stop here. If there are any questions, I'll take, but back to Vidya now and Chanchal. Thank you so much.
Sir, we have lots of questions. So we will try to take questions. If unable to take all, then we will share you on your mail and request participants to mail you directly.
Sure, not a problem.
Yes, sir. Sir, Mr. Bhaskar, I have 2-3 questions, so I'm just giving mic.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Thank you, Vittal Raj. I think it has been a fabulous session. I guess it has made, I think, many of us, introspect very, very deeply. So, I mean, as you rightly said, internal audit as a function has to play a role. It's a great opportunity. Yeah. But I just wanted to kind of do a pulse check whether how far internal auditors today are geared up. Can we really scale up? Can we really overnight transform? I think there is a big redundancy risk which is being kind of faced by all of us. I'm sure like many of us have got managed through a partnership approach, through outsourcing, etc. But today I see the entire risk universe, the risk landscape totally transformed. Now there's also an issue of board literacy also. So when you said digital illiteracy only at the first line, second line, I'm saying all over. So it's a massive reboot which is happening. I thought you can share some perspective on this.
Sure, sir. Thank you so much, Mr. Bhaskar. That very, very pertinent questions. Let me try to answer that. From my experience, what I am seeing here is, yes, many of the internal audit departments, either they are clueless about how to really take on this cybersecurity as part of their audit plan. But more importantly, many of the well-intended departments, as you rightly said, are struggling to say, how do we get it done? Because it is so complex. There is so much of skill sets required. It is so hard to retain. Very important question, as you rightly raised. Are we even capable as an internal audit department to do this kind of thing? So I would rather go back, and if we really look at the days when new technologies at the shop floor got introduced, new ways of thinking got introduced, when PQM got introduced, when we had value engineering that got introduced. Initially, we had no understanding of all this, but then over time, most of the internal audit departments have risen to the occasion. How did they do that? Well, you initially do outsource it, but then you also have an opportunity to learn from that outsourcing experience, at least those parts wherein the accountability of the internal audit department is going to be questioned. So that gives an excellent opportunity, both from the initial experience of partnering with someone, or even engaging with them, or with engaging with experts, to really get the insight into, okay, this is where my role is. Now, there is also a demographic problem, because we got excellent chief audit executives, but they have lived their prime through their expertise in manufacturing systems, in service processes. But then we find that at their kind of maturity and mindset, they find this a tall kind of ask to really start at this time and learn technology. It is not required again. How do we do that then? We have to please understand that each of us has certain competencies and advantages, and where we don't have, we need to partner. The traditional problem that I have seen generally is partnering is treated as outsourcing only, which means you completely forget about, give it to an enterprise, to an external professional firm, and forget about it. He gives a report and you only discuss to understand what is the report done. I think that should not be the way to really go about. The point should be that there is working with that entity to understand their perspective, discuss on your perspectives, learn from them, but also mark those areas wherein we can pick up from where we are, where our advantage is, move to the first stage. So I'm sure, for example, one of the biggest questions always asked me is, I am completely zero on technology. How do I start with cybersecurity as a career? My simple answer to this is this. A, as an internal auditor, you are an expert in business process. Is it yes or no? Yes. Okay. I'm sure as part of your work, you cannot today escape doing auditing, maybe even around the ERP. Yes, you take reports, maybe you do whatever you want through that, and you see, okay, through a very simple input output analysis, I am able to find out process deficiencies with regard to, let us say, a purchase process or frauds or whatever. Now I'm saying go the next step further. Try to understand how this business logic is handled by that application software, and you'll find that's a very easy place, because you're already starting from something that you know and you're proficient in, and you're going only that step wherein you know what questions to ask. Once you reach that step, believe me, you'll come nearer to the database. Once you come nearer to the database, then you'll know what questions to ask. Oh, okay, this is how the database handles things. You'll be able to ask, okay, now how do I handle this? So I think it's a progression thing, but it is time consuming. So it is very important that you pick up the right kind of team members. There are a lot of youngsters today who come up quite a lot of experience in this, but they don't have the requisite maturity on handling internal audits. It could be an effective combination. For example, simply hiring a data analytics guy in the team, even though he understands nothing about this, you simply ask him, hey guy, I want this value and this value compared on this condition and give me a report. He will do it in a jiffy for you. If you start learning programming, it's never going to happen. So there are a lot of ways and means by which we can get over this through the kind of partnering strategies. But again, as a word of caution, the partnering does not mean merely forgetting about giving it to somebody and forgetting about it. So I think that way, within a matter of a foreseeable future, you can build a very strong capability in the internal audit team for cybersecurity audits. But mind you, you still will need several areas, several technologies which are once in a while audited, where you don't need to build those capabilities. And believe me, there is enough amount of tooling also today available for auditing, which can actually go and evaluate the controls and come back to you and say, okay, this is missing. And you can always benchmark it back to the control objectives. So it's going to be very, depending upon your context of the organization and your technology profile, putting together an upgradation plan through partnering, through building very simple automation, through getting tech guys for data analytics in. So these could be some of the areas where we could just start with. And for example, penetration testing and vulnerability assessment. It is no rocket science. See, if I as a chartered accountant can simply ask the question, what the damn thing is this? Let me understand and do it. It is no great deal, because my focus as a chartered accountant is on what happens to this business system, rather than saying, oh, there is a lot of gibberish which is written here. And once you develop little interest in that, I'm not saying that every member will have the capability to do that, but even if one youngster can develop that interest, he can be lethal as a professional. I'm not sure if I answered a question, but you can please let me know. Bhaskar, are you there?
Thanks, Chanchal. No, I was on mute. I couldn't respond immediately. I think it was very useful. The challenge is, like many of us, it all depends on the kind of maturity curve where you are, Yeah. So the distinction between analytics and technology, both are different. Correct. Data is different, technological framework is different. So these nuances has to be understood. Typically, we tend to kind of, mix terms, etc. So that's where, people tend to make mistakes. But anyway, I think this is a moment of realization. This COVID moment is here. So this is a time when we have to use for completely kind of, overhauling our approach, and I think doing a reboot, a total reboot. Thank you. It has been a fabulous session. Yeah.
Sure. Bhaskar, I just wanted to add, this is something, anecdote which I always take. See, how do we do gold loan audits in banks when we go for this? What do? You only know that gold has something called purity. It has got something called stones, and you know that is a value proposition to all of that. But we are not experts in gold evaluation. So what do? For that part which is pure technical, we depend upon a professional who is an appraiser and who is obviously certified as competent by some agency, and who gives you the certificate. But you still know what questions to ask him from a control objectives perspective. While I know this is not the best example, but that is one way of looking at things.
Unmute.
Yes, sir, you can. Yeah, please tell.
Vittal, would you like to take one or two questions? Then I will sum up. One question or two. Yeah. Chanchal, go ahead with two questions.
Yeah, we'll take two questions. Not a problem.
Sir, we have two common questions. One is for the certifications and trainings for the cyber security, asked by 2-3 participants. So, and another is, can we share presentations with all the participants?
Yeah, certainly this will be shared with all the participants. That's not a problem. In fact, this is, I think, recorded, right? If I'm right, Chanchal?
Yes, sir, it's recorded.
So the recording would be available.
This is the webinar is recorded. That is also available. It will be put up in the YouTube, and people can go through, see.
Great. So just to answer that question, see, what are the certifications? See, first of all, you have to, I would always think you start from the position of strength, right? Some of us have a natural inclination towards technology. Okay, for example, a very simple thing like, even though that's not the best example, but I'm just saying, if let us say remote control doesn't work, if it kind of, you become so curious that you start opening it up and you do something about it, you have a technically analytical brain, right? So that's something we have to understand. So, and it is not necessary that somebody necessarily needs to have that. You could be good on the business side, you'd be good on the information side. So you have to decide whether you are good on the digital side, as we say, which is the business information in the digital form, or you are more in, or you have also capability on the technical side, because cybersecurity is an ocean today, and there are a whole lot of certifications which are offered by various entities. Some of them governance oriented, some of them are technical oriented. So as a natural progression, I would think it's good for an auditor to start from the governance side, because you will very easily understand it. So I would think that certifications like CISA, the CISA, the Certified Information Systems Auditor, or the CRISC are very, very good, because it gives you a tremendous amount of confidence to understand the subject. And from there, you can venture into the technology side. So that's my thinking on that.
Sir, requesting every participants who have whose queries not resolved, she can mail to you, and you can directly answer them.
Fine.
Yeah, thank you, Chanchal. I'll take over now. Friends, all of you will agree with me that it's an insightful ideas has been given by Vittal. It's a very comprehensive lecture presentation and very lucid in style. Anyone can understand. Even though he has used jargon, but he has explained it in a lucid style. Lot of questions were there. He answered them very well. And one thing I find, see, as per the internal auditing requirement, internal auditors requirement as per the IIA, as a consulting role, you have to take care of the effectiveness and efficiency of GRC, governance process, risk management process, and internal control process. Now, after listening to Vittal, he has also told that digital GRC you have to take care, digitalized GRC. And also another interesting point came up by way of a question also is that internal audit expertise and cybersecurity expertise both go hand in hand, and that's a very big useful combination. So with this, I thank profusely Mr. Vittal Raj, and I thank the organizers, Chanchal from Delhi and Menas from Mumbai. And I thank all the participants for coming up and participating and interacting with the questions and all that. Thank you very much. We can close.
Yeah, and from my side, first of all, thank you, Vidya, for reaching out to me and inviting me for this. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. It's a great opportunity. I thank the Institute of Internal Auditors. I think there's always a forum I love, because we are the closest to the business, and yet we are looking at it independently. And of course, thanks to the IIA team, Chanchal, and all the members there. It's been a rewarding experience. I guess I know it was a little long winding talk. I hope it was not too engaging and boring. I hope there were some takeaway messages. Thank you for your time and listening.
Thank you, Vittal. Very useful session. Yeah, thank you.